Hi, everybody. We are back for another episode of Elephant in the Room. And today we got Taranjit here back with us. Say hi, Taranjit.
Hi, Taranjit. Hi. Thank you, Muihan. Thank you. Good to be back.
Okay, let me go to the opening reel and we'll see you in a short while. Okay, we are back. So this is our fourth day in our episode of Elephant in the Room. So far, we've been having quite an enjoyable ride, except for yesterday. Maybe give chance to Taranjit to address the audience since.
Thank you. Allow me first to sincerely apologize. It was a terribly wonky connection that I had yesterday, and it resulted in me doing disappearing acts and appearing acts during the course of the conversation. So I really am really sorry about that. It's beyond my control, like an act of God for some instances. So sorry about that, guys. Today it looks a lot better, so I am looking forward to being here for the full 30 minutes. Thank you, Muihan.
Okay, great. So today we, as announced, we have a very special guest because we wanted to maybe look at the order of law in terms of employment actually, in this current state. Not only just this period, but maybe post this period, the next 3 to 6 months, which is very critical in that sense, right? Currently, you have any thoughts to that before I introduce our guest?
Yes, absolutely. So I think a couple of things are playing out, and the last 3 days have been quite interesting given our own discussions with the people around us. The uncertainty of the labor contract, the uncertainty of the employment landscape as you've got it right now becomes critical. There are also certain obligations that we talked about that employers have to their employees. And there are also accountabilities that employees have to their employers. Now, added to this would be quite a substantive change to the relationship that we have. And right now, we have a very noted, and I won't steal your thunder, Muihan, but we have a noted individual who I've had the absolute pleasure of working with on several engagements from the labor fraternity, the labor law fraternity. And I have absolute delight in having him on the show to co-host him and Muihan here. So Muihan, back to you.
All right. So today we have the pleasure of in today's show, Mr. Dharmen Sivalingam, who is the managing partner of Dharmen Sivalingam and Partners. Maybe I just play the introduction video so that he can give a better perspective of himself, right?
Dharmen Sivalingam and Partners, we predominantly represent employers on employment-related matters, the whole range of employment-related matters, including dealing with the normal stuff like misconduct or poor performance, more complicated areas like trade unions or mergers, acquisitions. I've been doing this in some shape or form for the past 25 years. I hope that what I can share with you today will be something that's useful that you can take back and use for your business.
Okay, so we are back and do welcome Mr. Dharmen. Dharmen, how are you?
Very good, thank you. I mean, given the circumstances, as good as it can get.
Great. So we are very delighted to have you with us, and I think maybe let's just dive straight in, and we will maybe do a follow-up question per se. But I think we wanted to ask particularly 3 questions today for you to maybe share some light, and then we will move on from that. So our first question, actually, we wanted to know was what are some of the options that can be considered in business in the planning for the immediate future? And immediate here means all the way anything between 3 to 6 months, right? So maybe you want to share that perspective with us.
Okay, great question, and I think this is really nailing the question that is in possibly 95% of business owners their minds. So before I dive into the options, I think it'll be useful for me to say that the starting point is with the end in mind. What I would do, and this is an opinion, it may not work for every particular business, and I can't stress that enough. I think the business owner needs to take lead in putting together the relevant considerations for their own business. So I would start by saying, okay, I'd like to get data points, real data points, up until 31st of December. And things are just so uncertain for me. I'm not going to make predictions as to what I should do with the business until I get more data points. So if I want to stay sustainable until 31st December 2020, what I will do is I relook at my projections, my revenue projections from the start of March, in fact, and do it right until December, and I will have a very deflated projection. Surely it's going to be based on guesstimates. So once I realize what's my revenue bucket is for the rest of the year, based on deflated and hopefully realistic projections, I would then look at from that figure that I'm going to earn, how much of that can I use for my payroll costs, all my employee-related costs. And I will, of course, try to spread this as far as possible. Again, to December, it would mean I may have to spread it thinner at some points, thicker at other points. That's really up to the business owner. So when I have eyeballed, this is what I have to remain sustainable until 31st December in terms of payroll costs. So when I have that figure in hand, I will then think about, all right, what does that buy me? A, can I keep everybody in employment on the same salaries? If I can't, do I need to keep everybody? Do I have less people? Do I retrench some people? Do I put some people on unpaid leave for a particular period? Some people on annual leave for a particular period? Do I have reduced work week with a corresponding reduction in salary? So there are various initiatives that you can consider for a company which is having difficulties in the financial because of the financial stress caused by MCO, COVID, and the uncertain future. You need to start with your plan, and then also, very important point, please look at all the various subsidy packages that are available, because if employees are on unpaid leave for 30 days, employees are entitled to a $600 payment from SOCSO. If employees maintain in employment for 3 months and their salaries are 4,000 and below, the employer can apply for a wage subsidy. So let's say I have an employee whose salary is 2,000 ringgit and I decide to pay him, keep him in employment. I need to keep him in employment for 6 months. And for 3 of those months, I am entitled to a wage subsidy of up to 1,200 ringgit per month for 3 months in respect of that employee. So let me just conclude on this question. Number one, business needs to identify what they need to do. Number two, businesses need to look at the various subsidy packages, see whether they can take advantage of that, because that can give them a bit more gas to last the journey. And then number three, once you have this, you need to go about implementing.
Excellent. Thank you, Dharmen. Now, what also is coming out very effectively and pointedly from our discussions is the relationship that that people are now experiencing with their employers. You also have instances where individuals are sitting at home for the first phase of the MCO. It was a bit of a novelty. We've never done this before. It's never happened before. And you know what? It's nice to be at home and work from home in that regard. The second phase of the MCO, we found that there is now some level of depth and despair slowly settling in. simply because it's now the reality that has now sunk in. The third stage, which is what we are going through right now, you suddenly realize that, those calls that I used to have are no longer coming along. Those calls that I used to, or I'm hoping to get, are no longer forthcoming. And that then has a net implication on the requirements of such people moving forward. What are your thoughts on that, Dharmen? And what are the implications to the individual employer in this regard?
Brilliant question, Sanjit. I think if we are now going into the 5th and 6th weeks, and if an employer, if a boss is not even calling any particular individual or few individuals, not at all, and I'm sure every employer out there during this period is calling some people more than others, and some people much more than others. And the danger zone that you're talking about, what about those people that is not calling at all?
Yes.
You make of that what you will, but if I'm an employee, I'm going to think, okay, really, am I adding value? And I guess what? I think that same question is going through the head of the employer as well. So I think for businesses who are going to be impacted moving forward, they are going to take these data points and convert them into decisions. Because if I live with you for, let's say the MCO lasts only for 6 weeks, and I didn't interact with you at all, it may be telling me that something different is the way I should move forward.
Excellent. And that actually has a direct implication then on the operating model of the company. It has a direct implication on the sustainability and the value that the organization is now seeing in these levels of employment levels as a whole. Muihan, back to you, my friend.
Okay, that's a very good perspective, and I think maybe let's move on to the second one, then we will get more thoughts as we go around. So the second question we have for you is on options, okay? So what are these options then mean to the employees, and how are they treated in the eyes of law? Maybe this is where we would like you to put on your legal hat and maybe give a more perspective on that, right? Over to you, Dharmen.
Okay. And let me not try and beat around the bush. So what do these options mean for the employees? The reality, it means a downside to income, right? But I think reality number two is an employee who has a job is much better placed than an employee who doesn't. And I'd like to quote the Prime Minister when he said, I think this was when he extended the MCO from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. He said this was a time, and I quote, untuk kita berganding bahu. I think employers, employees, and the government, all of them have to chip in to see through this period. So it does mean something bad for an employee in terms of money that hits his pocket is going to be impacted. Now, does that make it lawful? Okay, so just so that we're on the same page, what are we talking about? We're talking about pay cuts with or without reduced work week. We are talking about pay cuts with reduced work weeks. We're talking about putting employees on unpaid leave during the MCO. We may be talking about putting employees on annual leave during the MCO. Right? Any one of these initiatives, what does the law require? The law requires, and I'll come back to a point which is running my head in short while. The law requires general practice. General requirement is there needs to be consent of the employee. So let's talk about a post-MCO situation. So you can come back to work, but because the situation is bad, employer decides to have a pay cut. So what in essence is happening there is the contract of employment is being varied. The original contract signed by both parties said if you work X number of days for X number of hours, you get, say, a salary of 3,000 ringgit. But now I want to, as an employer, I want to introduce a 15% or 20% salary reduction. It requires a variation of the earlier contract, which logically would mean employer and employee needs to sign off and agree on those reduced terms. So if there is sign-off, if there is consent, the law will not intervene. There are certain restrictions which you can't go below. For example, you can't reduce someone's salary below minimum wage. But if you're reducing their salary, which, so long as it's minimum wage or above, the law doesn't intervene. But I would like to stress the challenge of getting consent, right? Not many people, I would like to think, would be very excitedly putting their hand up. Yes, go ahead, cut my salary. Yes, go ahead, put me on unpaid leave. So there's a whole challenge around that aspect, but that's a discussion for a different time. But if it's with consent, you're fine.
Okay, that is thank you for clarifying it at the perspective of legality. So maybe I'll just bring a side of people perspective and especially emotional side of it, because I always feel that in this kind of time it's very emotional, and emotions sometimes get the better of both employers and employees for that matter. How would that possibly, maybe in your experience, and I'm sure you have done many of this, how much of a trust or distrust actually contributes to a more effective resolution or a way forward for both sides in mitigating some of these things? So where I'm trying to come from is it seems like the elephant in the room, but without actually witnessing enough, probably you are more experienced in this sense, that whether how close-knitted are between the employers and the employees in this time versus one is less distant, what will be the impact like in your view, and what have you seen previously?
Okay, great question, Muhan. And I think you sort of basically touched around, the issue of consent. And I think that issue basically is premised on the employment climate, right? If the employment climate is positive, what do I mean by that? There's high levels of trust. Management has got credibility. Employees have been engaged all this while. You will have less problems in getting employees on board during these tough times. Now, if you've had a culture of distrust where the climate is not very positive, you're going to have greater challenges in trying to procure that consent from employees. You might be finding a lot more cases where if you proceed with this, you're going to have employees going to the labor department, going to the industrial relations department. And, one of the things that my experience is teaching me is that I cannot understress how important leadership skills are at this point in time. You see, even the first question, it requires a leader to be able to apprehend that this is what I got to do, play around with the figures. What's my business model? Do I change this? Do I change that? That's one aspect. The second and possibly more difficult aspect is we need to now go back to the employees and procure consent from them. How difficult is that going to be? The situation is very tough, people are uncertain, and yet I'm trying to cut somebody's salary. And this is where great leadership will make those, will jump those hurdles, and poor leadership will not be able to take on or manage the pushback. And again, employment climate. And I think very important for the leaders to also demonstrate that they are putting their neck ahead of employees. During the good times when we use words like, I'm thankful that times are good, right? So now it's payback time now. The employers need to tighten that belt a little bit more securely.
Very much leadership by example in that sense. I think we are all still human beings, and I think you aptly put it. If the bosses or the leaders take a show to say that yes, we are in this together, and we are the ones that will write this out together, but yet they don't show actions commensurating to that, I think that will be an utter failure. I'll get Taranjit to come in now because I think we've got some interesting question on our side. Maybe he and you can further this.
Sure. Thank you, Muihan. Actually, Darwin, just to add on to that, we are already seeing some very nice interventions and initiatives by some of the parties out there where management has actually started to take pay cuts they've started to go down, and one insurance firm comes to mind, a very close insurance firm. They're actually now saying, look, we are not taking on a bonus. Bonus is only half of what we were looking at. The rest is going back into the pool. So you do have some exemplary leaders out there, exemplary companies out there who are taking these interventions. Now, this is great for those big boys who have deep pockets to some extent. But what about for those smaller people, the entrepreneurs, the micropreneurs who are, 5-man, 6-man outfits? We are trying to stay alive. We're trying to stay afloat, let alone talk about these big coffers. So one question here that came out from Dr. Heng, a regular guest, and thank you, Doctor, for that, from Singapore. He asked the question around, will the usual contract still applies in terms of enforcement, given that this could be seen as an act of God, and therefore there could be some exceptions made to this? What are your thoughts on this, Dharmen?
Okay. I'm approaching this question from the angle of, so if an employer unilaterally decides to impose a pay cut and or unilaterally puts people on unpaid leave, and let's say the employee challenges, can I go to court and say, hey, my lord, these are unprecedented times, right? I mean, are you really going to tell me that I have to pay that amount, although I can't even benefit one iota from that person's service? Now, legally, Taranjit, it is my view that the law actually doesn't say that. Because if you look at the definition of wages in the Employment Act, I take a very, to me it's clear. Wages is payment for work done. It must follow, as night follows day, then, that if work cannot be done for whatever reason, wages need not be paid. Right?
Yes.
However, what happened was the FAQ from the ministry said that you must pay. You can't put people on unpaid leave. You can't put people on leave. And I totally get that the Human Resource Ministry is looking at more than just legal considerations. There are social considerations and so on. But to answer the question directly, let's say if I can go to court, I'm sure you've heard of the term force majeure.
Yes.
Force majeure is not a situation that can apply in an employment contract because you normally never have a force majeure clause in your employment contracts.
Yes.
So can we then say this is a frustrating event? The MCO frustrates the contract. Again, my opinion is no, because frustration would require a higher level of permanency. This is 2 weeks, extended 2 weeks, extended 2 weeks. It's not going to go for like 6 months or 9 months. So unfortunately, Malaysia, unlike Singapore, our laws are very, very pro-employee. So the requirement that the ministry has now stated is get consent. So you can't just say, oh, because of these times, I can do it unilaterally.
Good, thank you. There's also a discussion that is also one of the questions that had come up with regards to what would be an appropriate percentage of reduction that we are talking about. Would you have any thoughts around, would it be a 30%? Would it be a 25%? What would be deemed as reasonable, Dharmen, in your view, in your expert opinion?
Okay, I think that question has to be answered by looking at the level of the people involved, Taranjit. I think it's also very common for employers who are going through a pay cut scenario that the more senior people will take a higher percentage of a pay cut for two reasons. A, the assumption is they have more reserves than the lower paid employees, and B, the savings that you yield from cutting a lower paid employee is negligible compared to the higher paid employees, right? So I'm not going to put my head out and say this is the percentage. I would rather suggest some guiding principles. Number one, you cannot go below minimum wage. Number two, really in KL, if somebody is earning 2,000 ringgit or below, I struggle to see how they can even have a pay cut on that. So maybe you want to have a guiding principle that if you're below this amount, you're not even affected. And then I guess I would go by tiers. So the higher up, remember in Mars, they used the term, what was it? You know it better than me. The guys on top take bigger blame. You remember, Ranjit? Oh, I've lost him. Have I?
He's back.
Yeah. Noblesse oblige.
That's right. So, you know, I mean,
Noblesse oblige.
that's right. So the guys on top, you know, during the good times, they took more. During the bad times, they must take a bigger haircut.
Okay, guys. Wonderful, wonderful. We have so much excitement and conversation. It's always good to have friends to come on board and we get to discuss more. And yeah, we are out of time for today's episode. Well done, guys. Well done, guys. So we thank you so much for our friends for joining in, and as well as our audience to come in, leave us your questions and suggestions. One thing maybe we wanted to suggest in moving forward, we also want to get your feedback on what type of other topics or who do you think we should be hosting as our guests, you know, so that we can actually get this, because when we started the show on Monday, we said we are doing this for your benefit. So we also want to hear a bit from you. And with that, maybe I'll get Taranjit to say a few words to thank Dharmen as well.
Sure. Thank you, Muyan. So a couple of things here. Before I go out there to thank Dharmen, I would like to thank the audience. Shamila, a very dear friend of ours, a shout out to her, ex-colleague of a working colleague of mine from my earlier days. Thank you, Shamila, for joining us. Dr. Heng, absolutely brilliant to have you, as always, on board. Would love to have you on the show in due course. And Dharmen, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the effort, and your advice, as always, is absolutely invaluable. I would like to thank you on behalf of Yuhan and ourselves and the elephant in the room for addressing some of these critical issues that we currently are facing. We look forward to having you on board the next time, Dharmen.
You're most welcome. Thank you. I hope I managed to shed some light on some of the issues that you talked about.
You have indeed. Thank you. Yuhan?
Okay, so here's the show, and see you again tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Please tune in and invite your friends to come and share the joy and the knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.